You recently traveled to the Indo-Pacific. You were stopping in countries like South Korea, Japan, the Philippines. How has the Army's relationship with these countries evolved in recent years? And what are some of the ways you see the Army expanding its presence and capability to deter an increasingly aggressive China in the region?
I would say, Jen, it's really remarkable how much our relationships with armies in the region have deepened. And for me, my reference point is really from when I was Undersecretary of Defense for Policy during the Obama administration, and just seeing how much closer and how much deeper the partnership is now with the Japanese self-defense forces, the ROCs. We've obviously had an incredible alliance with the ROCs for many, many years, but particularly seeing how much closer we are with the Philippines is really remarkable. And I think you can see that in a number of different ways. For example, in the Philippines, we've been doing a number of fairly complex exercises there. We had our mid-range capability deployed in the Philippines, I think to considerable effect. I always think that demonstrating those kinds of combat capabilities strengthens deterrence in the region. I think a marker of kind of the deepening partnership with the Japanese is their decision to agree to host our new composite watercraft company at Yokohama. I was able to see that myself. And I just continue to see, there's more trilateral cooperation. And again, there's just, more multinational participation in exercises like Talisman Sabre, and the complexity of those kinds of exercises is increasing every year.
Okay. You talked a little bit about making sure that you had capability forward. Can you speak in more specifics on what that is starting to look like, with the Philippines, with Japan, with Korea, and potentially some of these other smaller islands? You've done a lot of exercising in Palau, for instance. What are some of the things that you've been seeing that present opportunity for being able to, keep things more forward in theater?
I think, first of all, we have to always remember that when it comes to being forward in Indo-PACOM or anywhere, we have to go at the pace of the nations themselves. Individual countries are going to decide what is in their national interests, and we have to be respectful, I think, of their sovereignty and their assessment of what makes sense for them. So our goal, I think, in the Army has been to really try to have as much combat credible capability forward in the Indo-PACOM theater as we can through exercises, to really try to have as much as we can forward west of the international date line 6 months a year or more. And we've been doing that, I think, through exercises and through having rotating capabilities like MRC, like the MDTF. We have been seeing Australia, for example, let us leave some equipment behind in Bandiana after Talisman Sabre, and I think they're supportive of seeing us build that out. We, have some non-lethal equipment sort of oriented towards humanitarian relief and disaster relief in the Philippines. And, the Philippines have let the MRC be operating there through exercises for quite a while. And so I think those are some examples of how we're making progress.
What are some of the areas that the service, you still feel, you need to invest maybe a little bit more or fill any holes in your strategy, to become part of the joint force in the Pacific?
I think some of the areas that the chief and I feel very strongly that we need to invest more in, both, from the perspective of the Army, if you will, and our sort of Army-centric needs, but also the needs of the Joint Force, is in the areas of unmanned aerial systems, counter-unmanned aerial systems, and electronic warfare. I think all of us, when we look at the what's happening in Ukraine, we look at the lessons learned from Ukraine. Clearly the role of drones, the role of capabilities to take down drones, that is going to be hugely important. And one of the things I heard from myself when I was in Germany, I was in I was in Germany in February and had the opportunity to see some of the training we were doing of the Ukrainians, and I spoke to a Ukrainian battalion commander, and he talked about how, the Russians were really increasing their EW capabilities in ways that were concerning. So those three categories are places where I think the Army needs to invest more. I think you'll see that in the budget that goes up to Congress next spring. That's an area where I think we also need to have more agility in our funding mechanisms, because the technology in those capability areas is changing so rapidly that we can't afford to get locked into something and then be only allowed to use that something for the next 10 years. We need to be able to move money around to purchase what is kind of the best coming out of industry. So that's something we've been talking a lot about with Congress is, is there a willingness to give us more agility in terms of moving money, perhaps in those three specific areas?
All right, well, that answer is a perfect segue to the next question that I had, which is, shifting over to Ukraine. You did get the opportunity to see how you were training Ukrainian soldiers. So aside from unmanned, can you provide some more examples or information on what Ukrainian soldiers have been able to teach the Army about its own formation and strategy?
Yeah, it was fascinating actually when I was over there in Grafenwehr. I came away with the strong sense that our soldiers were learning as much from the Ukrainians as we were teaching to the Ukrainians. A lot of what we were learning, again, was just the density of drones and all of the different ways that drones are being used. And I think, we are incorporating those lessons into how we are training. Some of you, may have seen some articles. General George took a number of members of the media down to Fort Johnson in Louisiana to see some of what we're doing in terms of transforming in contact. And we now have our OPFOR sending drone swarms, to test our ability, our brigade's ability to sort of deal with that. Something else we've really, learned from the Ukrainians in a very real way is it is incredibly important to minimize signature. The battlefield is increasingly transparent, and your Fitbit, I don't wear one of those rings that tells you how poorly you're sleeping, but a lot of our soldiers do. And, even little things like that can generate a signature. And so we've really been working on how do we minimize our signature? How do we make our command posts much smaller and more mobile? We've gone from having command posts that take hours to set up to being able to set up small command posts in a couple of Humvees in just 15 minutes. And so those are some of the things I think that we've been, really taking away from the experience of working with the Ukrainians.